Welcome to all of you to our Composting 101. Our Zoom Meister for tonight is going to be Judy. My name is Ken Boyer. Just a little FopCon history to start. For those of you, there may not be anybody here that isn't sort of a familiar face, but in case there is anybody, a little history. In the early 1970s, the Oak Park Conservatory was in a state of disrepair after being there for 60 years, and it was slated for demolition. However, now this beautiful building is on the National Register of Historic Places. And why is that? Because a group of concerned Oak Parkers and nearby folks successfully banded together and tried to save it and prevented it from becoming a convenient parking lot, which was what the plan was. Anyway, this informal support group inspired community leaders to incorporate the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory in 1986. So in 2021, the Friends will be officially celebrating 35 years of existence. We at the Conservatory offer a wide range of programs, as well as volunteering, educational and recreational opportunities, tours and classes. Our activities are a little truncated this year because of COVID, but we have persevered, and now we're experts in virtual programming. And so tonight, it's Composting 101. This program is being recorded, and you can use your Zoom chat box to submit your questions. We'll have time for them at the end. And for those of you who are politically oriented, Pence and Harris will be on at 8 o'clock. So as the host of this program, I can say I'm a determined but not very sophisticated composter. The stuff I've been accumulating and putting on our backyard back garden for the last 42 years probably isn't truly black gold, quote unquote. But my wife Sue and I have harvested plenty of vegetables and flowers from it. So we're going to learn a little more about how to do it right tonight, or in my case, probably do it better. And we're delighted to have Sandy Lentz as our speaker. Sandy's been a gardener since she was a child and has been a trained University of Illinois master gardener since 1999. This role requires 10 hours of continuing education annually and a minimum of 30 hours of volunteer activities. I suppose she'll get a few hours credit for this activity. Sandy has served on the initial Oak Park District Screening Advisory, Park District's Advisory Committee. She's been on the board of trustees of the Friends and had a term as president of it. A rumor has it that it was 5 years you did that, Sandy. So I was really impressed with that. Currently, she's in her second term as an elected commissioner on the board of the Park District, and she's in her second year as president of it. So to get us started, I'd like to offer this following inspirational quote from actress Bette Midler. Quote, "My whole life has been spent waiting for an epiphany, a manifestation of God's presence, the kind of transcendent magical experience that lets you see your place in the big picture. And that is what I had with my first compost heap." You're supposed to laugh. Okay, so Sandy, you're up.
That's quite an introduction. I don't know that composting gives anybody epiphanies, but it's one of those garden projects that I think all of us feel is fun and useful and does really good things for the things that we're trying to grow. And I want to start with something that probably all of you know, but it took me a while to sort it out, and that is the difference between compost and mulch. And mulch is stuff that people put on top of the soil. And it can be organic material, it can be stones, it can be any one of a number of things. But the idea is that you put it on top of the soil. And what mulch does is it helps to keep the moisture in, and it can help prevent weeds from coming through because many weed seeds need sunlight to germinate. Okay, compost is organic material, dead or dying plants, plant material, fallen leaves, prunings, weeds without their seeds, kitchen waste, but it's dead or dying plant material. Compost can be used as mulch. It can be put on top of the soil, but it is not just mulch. It is a special kind of material that is wonderful for our plants and for our gardens. One of the key things to remember about compost and about what's in it is what ought not to be in it, which is any animal products, meat scraps, dairy products, the scrapings of the inside of a cottage cheese container, any meat or dairy, things that come from animals should not go in your compost. And if they do, that can often result in, depending on how your compost is put together, critters coming along who think that there's a meal there. So it's really important to remember that compost is dead plant material. And why is it wonderful? Because it can be used as a mulch. It can keep down weeds. It can hold in moisture. But it also provides one of the other key things, which is it provides nourishment for the plants in your garden or even for your lawn. And that's the key value of compost, is that it is food. And the other part of it is that for the most part, if you have a reasonably sized garden, you can make your own compost, and compost is free. You don't have to get bags of it, although you can, and we'll get to that. But compost is basically rotted or almost rotted on its way plant material. And one of the things that what it does is that it does provide these nutrients. And it can be put on your, if you have raised beds, for example, as I do, where my vegetables grow. Once the dead materials are gone, there's still some garlic shoots coming up and other things, but the dead tomato plants and the rest, and the bean pods and those things that are taken out, you can put your compost on the surface of your raised bed. I get some from my compost bin, and we'll get to how you make it in a minute. But shovel it out an inch or two thick all across that bed, and over the winter, it will finish decaying and work itself into the soil and provide a great bed for next year's vegetable crops. It's called sheet composting, and you can even use things that have not rotted. If you have ground up your leaves and the last mowing of your lawn, if you have ground up plant material, and this should not be plant material that has either weed seeds or diseases on it. We've been dealing with a lot of powdery mildew this time of year, and it looks awful. And a lot of us are saying, gee, should I spray for it? What should I do with it? And the answer is mostly it's ugly, but it won't do any damage. So ignore it. And when the plants like Monardas and other things that have powdery mildew, when they're done and we trim the leaves off, those things with diseases ought not to go into your compost. The same thing is true with peonies. Most of our peonies get black spots of anthracnose, which is a fungal disease. They're ones that I cut down, and those leaves, again, don't go into the compost because you don't want to put diseases into your compost. If the compost gets really hot, it can kill them and it can kill your weed seeds. But I can never guarantee with a cold winter that my compost will get that hot. So things with diseases and things with weed seeds don't go into the compost. What can go? Deadheads. I have a patch of zinnias, and when their flowers are finished, those get trimmed off and those wind up in the compost. Now, I have a chipper, and compost works best when the pieces that make it up are small, because it gives the little critters that break it down more surface to work on, and therefore will break it down faster. So if you have a mulching mower, you can put your leaves and run the mower over it and then pile those into your compost pile. Okay, how do we make it? It can be done in a couple of ways. As simply, if you have a big yard, and most of us don't, pile it up in an obscure place in the back of your garden. And pile it up. What goes in? Ground up weed plants, ground up deadheads, carrot tops, onion skins, any organic material. Kitchen waste is a good thing. We don't always think about it, but again, those kinds of things, carrot tops, eggshells, although we don't need a lot of them because our soil is alkaline, and extra material that can add to making it alkaline isn't necessarily useful for it. Coffee grounds are wonderful because the texture will help our clay soil and will help make the clay soil a little better in terms of its texture. What else can go in it? Carrot tops, and then brown things. There's a lot of fuss and a lot of complexity about, well, how much green and how much brown and how do you layer it? I'm kind of a lazy composter. I try to use both, but I don't get fussy about how much. I put a handful of soil into my compost as I work on it, because guess what? In that soil are all of those little teeny critters that are going to be breaking down the material that's in the compost. And so a handful of soil, and you want to keep it damp. Composters, things you put your compost in, come in lots of different formats. If you have a big enough yard, as I said, you can simply put it in a pile in a back corner somewhere, maybe fence it in a little bit with chicken wire, and maybe have two, so that as one begins to break down, you can use that and then add material to a fresh one. But most people can't do that because they don't have the space. So there are a lot of, and Ken mentioned when we were beginning to get ready, he has a 3-foot square black plastic one. Is that the one you use, Ken, with a lid on the top?
I have 2 of those little babies.
2 of those babies. Well, I only have 1. And they're vented on the side and they sit on the ground. And so when you put your material in, the black plastic absorbs the light. Mine's on the south side of my house, kind of out of the way, so people it's not the first thing they see when they walk into my garden. And I'll throw a handful of soil in, and I'll also squirt some water on it. They say that the texture should be the texture of a wrung out sponge. I don't put my hands in it and wring it out. I just take a garden fork and kind of stir it around and make sure that there's enough moisture. You can tell if you've put a lot of dead leaves in it and they're really dry and they're kind of big, you want to water them down so that the moisture helps that material to break down. There are tumblers, mostly green things that look like garbage cans on a frame, and you put your materials in and you turn it. And some people think that makes your compost happen a little faster. I have not used one, but a lot of people do, and they find that they work really well and that they're easy to manage because the compost is up off the ground and it's easier to get at. So that's another option. Some people have just a set of bins that are framed with stones or bricks and framed with wire and chicken wire, and use those. Again, they're not as attractive and they tend to require more space than the black plastic ones do. But the idea basically, if you're going to make your own, is you want green stuff, brown stuff, and I'm going to divert myself for a minute because there's been a lot of conversation recently about how much cleanup we do in our yards this time of year, what brown stuff we use. And the current knowledge is that we don't want to take it all down, that there are beneficial insects that winter over in the stems of things like our coneflowers. There are bees that make nests in those pithy stems of asters and other things over the winter. There are critters that live under the leaf litter in our perennial beds. And so the thought is that maybe it's not such a good idea to clean it all up. Cut back those asters if they're flopping 6 feet tall and they finish blooming, but leave some of the stems at least until spring. So you might not have as many brown stems, but you'll certainly have some leaves. And if there are more, if you've got a couple big trees and there's more leaves, then you can realistically put in your perennial beds, grind them up, put them in your compost bin, and as one of the books about this says, let it rot. And it's good because if you've ever been in the forest, you know what the forest floor smells like. It's rotted needles from all of those trees that have been there and watered in and walked on and become not only a wonderful cushion to walk on, but also become the nourishment for the trees and the shrubs that live in that forest. So green stuff, brown stuff. If you have an easy way to put a container either in your kitchen or out your back door, all those carrot tops and things like that that can be dumped in them, and there are biodegradable bags that line them. You can use those over the winter, and then when you've got a break, take those out and dump them into your compost bin or your compost pile. It may take a while for it to decompose. If it gets really hot, the compost materials will decompose, will cook, and at the bottom, you'll wind up, when you lift the lid, when you lift the little window at the bottom of these where the compost has settled to the bottom, you'll shovel it out and it will smell, it'll smell like a forest floor. It smells wonderful. It won't smell rotten. And again, the reason it doesn't is because this is all plant material. Again, no chicken bones, no bread, even though that comes from plants, no eggs, no animal materials of any kind. And if you're careful about that, you won't have critters. I've had this same compost bin on the soil for probably 12, 15 years, and I have never had a pest animal of any kind. There are rabbits who nest under the porch next to it, but they don't get into the compost, and they're not attracted to the compost because it's dying plant material. If you are looking for other options, the Village of Oak Park has a composting program, and it's called, and I think I have the thing here, it's called Compostable. And I don't know whether you can see this or not, but it's called Compostable. And if you go on the village's website and you go to under Village Services, there's a couple pages on what it is and how you can participate. You can participate with a neighbor, and then it's collected. The material that you generate is collected, and then it's composted and it's brought to, there's a bin at Ream Park, right by the drive-through, next to the mulch pile. And if you participate in the compostable program through the village, you can take then that compost and use it in your own garden. You can also buy compost. And here's a place where you might want to be really careful about what's in it. It's like the mulch that comes with dye and other things that you decide you may not want to put in your garden. Look at the labels. Consider where you're getting it from. Making your own compost is really easy, and I strongly recommend, if you want to do it, it's the best free fertilizer that you can possibly have. And so as a consequence, if you really feel like you need to buy some, be really careful about where it comes from. Look at the bag, consider the place that sells it. there's a big company called Midwest Ground Covers, and they've got a couple of additional businesses, and one of them is that they do make and sell compost, and they would be, and I'm not allowed to make a specific business recommendation, but they're a local company, and they would be a possibility. They're out in St. Charles, and they'd be a possibility that you could get reliable compost from. But it's so easy to make, and most of our gardens are small enough that we really don't need a lot of it, so that it's easy enough. And as I say, I strongly recommend that you make it. You can also get something called mushroom compost, which is the material that mushroom growers grow mushrooms in. And it's lightweight and an even brown color. Again, it's the texture is really nice. And I get it because the DuPage County Friends of Extension in our adjacent county get it and sell it as part of their spring fundraiser. So I know where it comes from. I like what it does to my vegetable gardens. So I get some to benefit them and then mix it with my own compost. Again, read the label, read the bag, know your source, know what's in it, ask questions if you need to, because you don't want to be putting what you think is beneficial, and you don't want to be putting noxious chemicals in your garden unknowingly. So my strong recommendation is make your own, because it's really easy. And it doesn't, it certainly isn't going to, my bin is fairly close to the property line of my neighbor's house, and they've never had a problem with smells or with critters or with anything else. Let's see, mushroom compost. When do you use it? Well, now for starts, because it is fertilizer and it won't burn the roots of anything. You can put it on, as I said, on your vegetable beds as you're putting them, in effect, putting them away for the winter. I have a fairly long perennial border, so I will put my compost in a wheelbarrow and drag it along, and take trowels full of it and put it around the bases of my perennials in my perennial border. Not piled up around it. We don't want any of these volcanoes like we've seen with mulch around trees, but work it in with a trowel with a little fork, and in effect, you're giving them giving those plants a head start for spring. You can also put it in as you get your beds ready for spring. You can put a forkful of it in, as we are now, many of us, planting bulbs. I got rid of my front lawn, dug some trenches on a November day that was very cold, and I did not know why I was doing this, but I dug some trenches and then put my bulbs in there with a mix of some compost and some of the soil. And it provided the bulbs with food for their roots as they got them started, and then for the bulbs as they were beginning to grow in the spring. But one place not to use your compost is when you are starting seeds. I start some seeds under grow lights in my basement and over the winter, and they need to be started in sterile seed starting mix. And compost has critters in it, and it's just not safe. There may be mold spores in it, for example, and you'll wind up getting all your little seedlings up, and then they will do what is called damping off, which means they'll go up and then they'll do this and then they die. So you don't want to use compost to start your seeds in. If you're transplanting things after they've gotten to a larger seedling stage, if you're transplanting them, potting soil for transplants is fine. You may want to mix a little bit of compost in with it, but not a lot, although it will not burn the roots of small plants. But don't start seeds or seedlings in it. That's not what it's intended to be for. The invitation that came that I got day before yesterday, I guess, with some gardening IQ, with some compost questions. And I'm going to, if any of you saw those, I'm going to talk about those a little bit. One of the questions was, is compost only good for edible plants? And the answer is no. It's food, and it's plant food. So it can go on your vegetable garden. It can go around your perennials. It can go in that bed that you're planting to put your zinnias and marigolds and other things in. It's an equal opportunity plant food. And it doesn't require a lot of time and expensive equipment. Compost bin, I don't know what I paid for it. It was long enough ago. Ken, do you know what those black ones go for?
Around, I would say around $100. The place where I've gotten mine is, and now I'm doing what you said I'm not supposed to do, Sandy.
Well, but we won't listen.
There is a outfit called Gardener's Supply that sends us lots of catalogs, and they have a variety of these things, from the rotating ones to the bin ones to anyway. You can you can go higher than 100 and you can go lower than 100. I think what you need to have, they tell me, is you have to have at least a cubic yard of volume in there in order for the process to
get hot enough
to, you know, work its magic. To what extent you have to get to 140 degrees and, you know, have a thermophilic environment or whatever that it is. I'm not sure that that's necessary. It just means you have to wait longer. But the ones that I have are handy because they have these little trap doors at the bottom, and you can open those trap doors.
Lift it up.
I take the good stuff out of the bottom, and then pile more, you know,
uncooked
materials
stuff
on the top.
That's
it becomes a kind of a continuing process. So you don't necessarily have to empty the whole darn thing out to get down to the good stuff.
That's exactly the kind of compost bin that I have. And you lift the little door at the bottom and stick your shovel in, and there's the good stuff, and then you can continually add things to the top. I don't even remember spending that much, but this is one of those things where once you've got a good one, it lasts indefinitely. I've had mine for years and used it routinely. And
I have one comment about that, Sandy. You know, my two composters are out in the alley next to my recycling bin and my garbage bin. And on one occasion, a year or so ago, the garbage truck came by and wiped out my poor little composter.
Oh dear.
So at that point, I thought it was destroyed. So I bought myself a new one. And then I managed to fix the old one. So now I have two of them.
Now you have two. Now you have two. Somebody was, we've got some questions. And Judy, do we have some questions?
Yes, we do. Annie was asking about those char spots on the maple leaves. If you see something that doesn't look fully healthy, should you avoid putting it in your home compost as well as the village compost? Like, those things shouldn't be composted.
The village's page on their composting has a section called acceptable materials and items not accepted. I haven't read that, so I don't know. But in general, you don't want to put things in your compost that are diseased in some way. And the tar spot that we've been seeing is a fungal disease. Okay. So I don't recommend putting those leaves into your compost or leaving them around your plants if you're going to just rake them into your beds.
Okay, so just remove them completely and just in green waste bin versus trying to compost or leaving them, which you had advised about healthy leaves.
And that's true also of peonies. They get black spots on them. They get flower buds that don't make it. That's anthracnose, which is another fungal disease. We had a cold, wet spring, and so there's been lots of fungal stuff around. And again, I don't put I have 3-4 peonies. I don't put those leaves in my compost either. There's plenty of other stuff. I went out and did some deadheading this afternoon, and I had a whole truck full of stuff again. So it's better not to. And then the same thing is true with weeds that have gone to seed. Don't put the seeds in.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
So
Next.
another question from Andrea is, bread was a surprising one. It didn't seem like that would be a problem, but are there other specific foods that we should avoid putting in the compost bin other than the meat, the bones? Like, are there other sneaky?
Dairy, meat and dairy. And I said, again, I'm pretty conservative, and bread will attract critters. And it also is oftentimes winds up in the garbage with butter on it, or jam on it, or peanut butter on it. So it's one of those things, again, that, as I say, I'm really pretty conservative about it, and I don't put bread or breadcrumbs in my compost.
Okay, so any vegetation, like you didn't mention banana peels, but
Banana peels are fine. The only problem with banana peels is that they're heavy and dense, and it takes a while for them to break down. Now, if you cut them up, fine. They're plant material.
right, okay.
They're plant material. Think about where the thing comes from. If it's a carrot top or a banana peel or a potato peeling, fine. But the denser it is, the longer it takes to break down. And that's why we recommend chopping stuff up.
So question, if I have salad that I didn't finish, but it had vinaigrette on it, what do we do? Can it be composted? No, avoid.
I wouldn't, it's got oil on it.
Okay,
And even though olive oil, for example, comes from plants, again, the oil can be attractive to animals. And this is one of those, when in doubt, don't.
okay.
You'll generate plenty of stuff to put in it.
Can newspaper be used?
Yes. Yeah, newspapers. We often use newspaper to make new beds. Most of the inks that are now used in newspapers are soy ink. So maybe the colored funnies, maybe, but crumbled up newspapers, particularly if they're wet, and again, if they're shredded, but plant material is really best.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't have any more questions in the chat, folks. So if you guys have questions, we can open it up. Sandy, you mostly covered all the key points you want to make.
Ken, you had been working, providing me with some coaching as I was putting this together. Do you have things that I have missed?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I've inquired of various people about this, and there's some mixed messages that I've gotten about it, but originally, long ago, I think the original Rodale composting books from Walnut Acres in Pennsylvania, they used to extol the value of putting manures of various kinds in your. Now, I suppose you could say that's an animal product, but it's an animal byproduct of eating vegetable materials. So would you want to comment on using manure? I tend to I tend to spike my composters with composted cow manure.
Okay.
I
And
think that bag of composted cow manure is going to have lots of valuable microorganisms in it, and hopefully not too many weed seeds, and
depends on what the cow ate.
will boost the biologic activity that I'm trying to foster in that composter.
And I'm glad you raised that, because you'll see composted manure in bags in your garden centers. And the key word there is composted. It's not raw and fresh and stinky cow pies out of your neighbor's field. It has been composted, it has been processed so that it's available and it provides nutrients for your crops. It certainly is a good thing to add. I have not used it, but my garden is small, and I only have one compost bin instead of two. So composted, again, read the label, read the tag, make sure that it's something that has not been treated or otherwise affected by other chemicals that you don't want to put in your compost or in your garden. But it does contain, again, those critters that can help break down your
That's
plant
okay.
material
You said
and provide additional nutrients for your garden. And that's what this is food. It's nutrients for your garden.
I have one or two other comments, and
Good.
they kind of turn out to be questions too. So grass clippings are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Grass clippings, if you're a real natural person and you don't put Scott's number 1, 2, 3, and 4 poisons for crabgrass, dandelions, et cetera, on your lawn,
Mhm.
those grass clippings are good for your composting.
They
But
are.
if you put all
And-
that other junk on your grass, probably not such a good idea to stick in your composter.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, I cut my small back lawn this afternoon and took the grass clippings. It's a mulching mower, but there were clippings underneath the deck of the mower. So we just scraped them out and into the compost pile they went. And those are very good green additions. We don't put any chemicals on our lawn of any kind, nor do my neighbors on either side. So I don't have to worry about pesticide drift. And grass clippings are great.
Great.
So the other comment that I had was about the literature of composting, which is actually rather gigantic.
Yes.
I did what I often do, which is to go to Google and say, I put in 4 best composting books. And I got several lists of best
Mhm.
composting books. So there's one that you mentioned actually, which is called Let It Rot.
Let it rot. Mhm.
There's another one which I mentioned before, which is from the Rodale Press, which is a sort of the original
One of
organic
the,
gardening
yeah.
enterprise.
Mhm.
And then there's a third one that I got, which if you're wondering where I got my wonderful quote from Bette Midler, it came from this book.
Which is like
Which is
composting.
called Composting for a New Generation. And it's a nice book. I got it from the library, actually. I got it from Tinley Park Library via the, you know, the
Interlibrary loan. Mhm.
our library now gets books from all over the place. So anyway, that was a good one. And if you just go on Google, you'll find a bunch of these books and they'll give you tips. For example, the one I just showed you shows you how to make a composter out of a garbage can, how to make a cylindrical thing to put your leaves in and throw your coffee grounds on top of it. And before you know it, you've got some good stuff. And anyway, so I recommend educating yourself on the subject. You can learn some things.
One of the great things about winter in this climate is that it's great for reading garden books. And I couldn't agree, Ken, with you more. In fact, I'd like to get that gardening or composting for a new age, because again, you can always learn things. And it's like the whole business of, well, do you clean up your yard in the fall? Same thing. The science continues, and it's important to stay in touch and to learn and to figure out that what we can do to protect our critters that we need to keep as part of the web of life in our yards and not scrape them all out.
So I have some
one of the things, I have something else I'd like to mention, and that is something called compost tea. And if any of you are tea drinkers, the tea comes for many of us in bags, little permeable bags, and we put them in our cups and we pour the boiling water in and the tea swirls around and we make tea. You can do the same thing with your compost if you want a liquid fertilizer. And some people like to use that on their houseplants. So you can get, again, all you have to do is Google compost tea and you'll find many vendors who have the bags that you can use. You fill it with your finished compost and put it in a big plastic container, a big garbage can, whatever, with some water and let it steep for a few days. And you have compost tea, and that liquid is maybe not black gold, but it's dark tea and it's great fertilizer for your houseplants.
Great. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions in the chat if we can take a few more of those.
Sure.
Annie's my rock star with her questions. She's going to be an expert composter after this. So she is wondering if you have to position your composter so it faces in a certain direction. And then also wants to know, as a follow-up question, how do you handle the seasonality when it's cold here? Are you still throwing things into your compost bin in the winter? Is there a specific timing for how you should approach that? And I think I got that question. Let me just see.
As far as the positioning is concerned, you mostly don't want it sitting in the middle of your front yard. If you have a dark one like Ken and I both do, the black ones, black plastic will absorb heat. So I tried to put mine in a place where it got a fair amount of sunlight, because that helps to heat the material inside and helps it to cook. So if at all possible, put it somewhere where it gets full sun. Mine's on the south side of my house, but there's a house fairly close to it, so it doesn't get too much sun. And yes, you can continue to put things in all winter. You may not want to slog through the snowbanks, but you can. I do coffee grounds and vegetable peelings and things like that can go in all winter. Doesn't get too hot, and if it's steaming, if it gets really hot, that's wonderful. It may not, and if we have a really long cold spell, the function will slow down. But then as soon as it warms up again, it'll continue to cook.
Okay, there was another question, and I'm not sure if you are able to answer this or not, but Tracy's curious about vermiculture, and I know that Conservatory, we did start doing some worm composting there. Is there anything that you can speak to regarding vermiculture?
I'm not an expert. I have not done worms or worm composting. Basically what happens is you use red wiggler worms in containers, and you feed them with vegetable scraps, and their poop becomes fertilizer, becomes compost. I've not done it. I would do as Ken recommends and go Google worm composting, and you will be inundated. Be careful where the source of the information. And this is true across the board. If the material comes from a reliable source, for example, the University of Illinois Extension, which does the Master Gardener training, has excellent websites. It's .edu, so it comes from the U of I, and it's probably applicable in our area. If it comes from University of Wisconsin or Indiana or Purdue, the .edu sources, particularly for universities that are in our area, will provide reliable information. If it's .com, somebody's trying to sell you something, and you need to pay attention to what it is and where it comes from. But yeah, you'll find a lot of information about worm composting. And I know that the University of Illinois Extension, the DuPage office, has volunteers who do worm lessons in school. So there's lots of good information out there. I don't have it, but there's lots that's available.
And I know we have Ken Gentry at the Conservatory who manages our worm bins there, as well as some other Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory board members I know are active. So if you have questions, you should feel welcome to reach out to Kent at the Conservatory. And if you need his email, just let me know. So what about, there was a question on the tip of my head. What was I going to, is there, in the spring, do I put more compost down?
You can, because remember, it's fertilizer. So when I start my vegetable garden up and I have sheet composted it, I'll take a fork and dig that in as I get ready to plant. And then I will use it as fertilizer. I'll put my tomato plants in, and I use frames, because I grow tomato plants that are indeterminate and they'll go all over everywhere. And then work some of that compost in around the base of the plant as I'm watering it in. Not a lot, but a couple of trowels full as nutrients to get those plants started.
Okay. So I'm happy to open it up for questions if anybody wants to unmute. We've got a nice cozy group here, so you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask Sandy and Ken, anybody here, a question if you'd like. I'm curious who's doing the home compost bin, do it yourself. I think my frustration sometimes with the village program is that I don't get to access that free compost that I'm supposed to be able to get as being a participant in that program. So now I'm going back to, should I build my own, you know, compost bin in the backyard again, so that I always have what I want. So that's my dilemma.
Mhm.
I'm sure everybody else struggles with that too. And when I started my composting, I learned about just taking Rubbermaid garbage bins, and I just drilled holes around them. And that's what I used. And so I didn't have that handy little door that you guys are talking about in the bottom. Like that wasn't, so I was doing a lot of manual mixing and turning. And I had one that was kind of cooking and the other one was kind of door one. It just became a little bit more labor intensive than I planned on. So I jumped into the village program, which seemed easy enough.
That's why it may be, if you decide you really want to do it, get a commercial one
I think
that has the door, that has a lid, which keeps anybody interested out. And then those, the ones that Ken and I both have slots in them that let air in, because you need to get some air in as part of the process. So if you really wanted to do it, these bins, and I don't even think they're that expensive anymore, but again, a good quality solid one that you won't poke your fork through the first time you try to turn it is probably a good thing.
I have a little comment on that one, Sandy and Judy. One thing that I do with my composters, on the advice of one of my very organic down the street neighbors, was to acquire a gadget which is called a compost aerator. And there are a number of designs for such things on the market. The one that I have kind of looks like a shortened corkscrew. It's big and it's got a handle where I can sort of screw it into the
and
materials that are in my composter. And then when I lift it up, the things that are at the bottom get nearer to the top, and the things that are on the outside get nearer to the middle. And therefore you get more air and more mixing and hopefully more biologic activity going on. There's that kind, and then I've seen several other designs. The one that I think is very commonly seen, it's kind of like you have two little wings on the end of a long metal rod, and when you push this metal rod with the two little wings on it down to the bottom of your composter, the wings fold up parallel to the handles, but when you lift up, then the wings flop down and it pulls all the materials down at the bottom up to the top. Anyway, an aerator like that, I think, helps if you have one of those black plastic 1 or 2 cubic yard composters with the little trapdoors.
I see a question came in from Leon. How do you tell if the compost is done composting and ready to be used? Like, how long does it take usually once you get started for it to be cooked and ready for using in your garden? How can you tell?
With the little lid at the bottom, you can take your shovel or just a trowel and dig some of it out and see. And if it's crumbly and dark and not full of sticks, and it smells good, it's ready. Again, and one of the other things that I should mention is that you don't need is one of those commercial compost starters. They don't really work. They're designed to help the compost cook. And if you have adequate water and adequate hands full of soil, you really don't need compost starter. The aerators, I've seen several of them. I use an old-fashioned 4-pronged pitchfork and just go down and kind of stir it around. Again, as I said, I'm kind of a lazy composter, so I don't have that particular tool, but it's enough to get the air in. And if I put material in over the winter, and have put things in the fall, as I have been doing, it'll be they'll be compost ready in the spring. And as it cooks over the summer, there'll be more of it ready for me to sheet compost my vegetable gardens.
Okay.
And it doesn't need to be too thick. You know, it's an inch or so is plenty.
Mm-hmm.
An inch or so is plenty, so.
Okay. If we notice that our soil is full of clay and we want to start a new bed or try some planting in an area, does it make sense to use compost as kind of something to break up that thick?
Absolutely. You don't want to use sand because clay and sand makes concrete. Oh. And that makes it even worse. Compost is great because you can fork it in, you can dig it in, it can help to break up clay soil. We have nasty clay soil in this part of the world. I've been gardening in this patch for longer than I will admit to, and I still have clay soil that needs to be broken up. And one of the reasons I use compost is because it does that. Helps to break up the clay and make the soil better in terms of holding water and also getting enough air in it.
Okay, great. Okay, anybody have any other questions, you guys? Who's curious, wants to ask our fantastic panelists the burning questions about compost?
Good pun there.
Oh, ouch.
Trying. Well,
if anybody has questions, they can certainly email them to you, Judy, and you can forward them to me, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Absolutely. We're your resource. If you have questions about anything, compost or otherwise gardening, we're happy to research it and find answers. We're surrounded by master gardeners, which is just such a great program for us to be able to tap into. So I will just wrap us up and thank everybody for joining us, and especially to Sandy Lentz, who took her time to prepare this extensive, detailed program about composting. There's just so much to know and learn. And to Ken Boyd, who was wonderful, complimentary to Sandy and hosting us. Mm-hmm. And thank you all for being a support of the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory. And our Oak Park Conservatory is open for your use. Please come join us and visit us, and watch for exciting new programs coming more post-holidays. We've got some good programs coming up in January, February. Which is the best time to come to the conservatory, when the world is full of gray slush and you walk in and it smells wonderful. I think we have a house plant program that we'll do maybe in January, and I think February we're going to talk about winter pruning. So if you're really dying to get out into the garden and, you know, really have at it, we'll teach you how to do some pruning of your shrubs and trees. So, so those are some things to look forward to. But thank you, everyone. And you're welcome. It's been fun.